Hey, what's up, everyone around the world? Happy Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Whenever you're catching this, we hope that you are doing well and that God is speaking into your life. Today, you get to enjoy this conversation with us as we all pour into this from different parts of, well, the United States, because we don't have any outside of the country folk. But let's say good morning to everybody. Hey, what's going on, Ben Amoa?
Hey, what's up? It's good to be back. Just got back from Peru for a mission trip with the Academy. And yeah, it's good to be back here to share with everyone.
Man, good to see you. Anything that you learned over there or something that you liked?
Oh, love the food. The heat was overbearing and mosquitoes really like me. So
Mosquitoes, it's that O negative blood, bro.
yes, it is.
The good stuff. That's top shelf, baby. Morning, Kyle. How you going?
What's up, man? It's good to see you guys.
You sound good and crisp, man.
Do I sound good? I've been really working on my audio game. You know,
Well,
I invested a bunch, did a bunch of stuff this week to get ready, and you know,
Vocal warm-ups.
vocal.
I stole this wonderful microphone from Pastor Seth Gaskin's office. So thank you, Seth.
Thank
Shout
you.
Shout out
Thank
to
you,
the
Pastor
robbery. Woo.
Seth. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
We don't promote it.
And of course, all the way from Hawaii, aloha. How you doing, Sarah?
Good. Sunrise, you guys will get to witness. That's very exciting.
Yeah. We're gonna live vicariously through your camera screen. And coming from Keene, Texas, Anthony Leiter. What's going on, Toad?
It's funny you say that, like, because I'm actually half and half now, so I'm not even half and half. I'm like, I fly down to Keene once a month and preach, and then, but I'm still in Berrien. I live at Andrews, so I'm yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that,
Gotta
bro.
finish that
Gotta
MDiv.
finish
so
that MDiv.
I moved down full time in August.
Gotta get
but,
it done.
Yeah.
Is there like a cultural contrast when you move between Berrien Springs and Keene? And is it noticeable to you,
Definitely.
like when you pop in and out?
Definitely. Yeah, you see far less like cowboy boots, hats, overalls up here in Michigan. Yeah,
But there's still
they're
cows.
very true.
There's cows on the
That's
property.
very true. Yeah.
On
At
Keene?
Andrews, although
Or
I don't know,
Andrews?
And both. All of the above.
because they
Whoa.
phased out the
All of
dairy a
them.
while back, so I think there still are live cows. maybe.
Live cows, you specified. Ooh, this got dark. Okay.
Who has bigger
Ooh,
trucks,
Texas
Anthony?
for sure.
Texas.
Although Michigan boys will
okay,
surprise
okay,
you. They'll
yeah,
surprise you.
fair.
And maybe some women too.
Is that right? Do they drive big
Seriously.
trucks out there in Kansas, Kyle?
Oh yeah, they got him. They got him. We're not that far from Texas. There's like one state between us.
That's real.
So we get howdy.
That is the correct
Howdy.
terminology.
All right.
We have
Well, howdy,
rodeo
everybody, and welcome on this morning. We're going to jump right into our text. We're in chapter 16 of the book of Acts. I want to invite you there. Just before we start to read, I'll start to read this morning, and we've got 4 sections we'll move through. Sarah May, would you bring us in with a word of prayer?
Yes, absolutely. Let's go ahead and pray. Dear God, thank you so much for a new day, an opportunity for a conversation and just reflection. Thank you so much for community and the opportunity to pause in the middle of all the things that we have. Just help us to open up our hearts to you. We love you in your name.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that. All right, let's head on over to Acts chapter 16, and we're reading from the New Living Translation today, and you can follow along whatever version you have. Paul went first to Derbe and then to Lystra, where there was a young disciple named Timothy. His mother was a Jewish believer, but his father was a Greek. Timothy was well thought of by the believers in Lystra and Iconium, so Paul wanted him to join them on their journey. In deference to the Jews of the area, he arranged for Timothy to be circumcised before they left, for everyone knew that his father was a Greek. Then they went from town to town, instructing the believers to follow the decisions made by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in their faith and grew larger every day.
That's good.
What rang in your ear?
It seems very similar to like what we've been hearing over and over, kind of like this similar story. But but this time it's just in another place. You know, it's they're continuing on what they've been doing. They're focused.
Did no one else pause on the like circumcision
Yeah, my
part?
man.
Like,
No, that just kept echoing in my head. And
like, that seems
You
like
can tell you're a chaplain, Sarah May.
I'm like kind of concerned about his mental
Like, is the
health.
patient okay? What's going on here?
Like,
Well, you know, I'm glad you called it out, Sarah, because we know that Paul is very accepting of the Gentiles and does not really, you know, he's a big defender of not having to do Jewish practices, right? He's like, hey, look, we don't need circumcision. We don't. This is Paul, and so interesting that he has Timothy be circumcised. Let's talk about that.
yeah.
Because I think obviously there's a reason why he's doing that, right? What are y'all thinking?
Well, the next sentence is or phrase is, for everyone knew that his father was a Greek. So there's an automatic assumption that differentiates him from people, I think. I don't know. I think it's just interesting that they go through this really huge feat and kind of an intense one, you know, to say like, okay, now you can do this ministry. Now you can come into this space and have a voice. And it is a dichotomy.
There's almost something to be said about cultural credibility, and sometimes I don't know. I think maybe we're kind of averse to that these days. That's almost a bit of a. This seems like almost a bit of a hot take by Paul, considering his usual stances on this stuff. This seems to be out of character, maybe with him, but there almost seems to be something to be said about cultural credibility, and like sometimes you may have to sacrifice, lay things down in order to speak to the culture.
I wonder if it was something that, like, because Timothy grew up in a home of two different beliefs, or maybe not necessarily two different beliefs, but one that was more obviously practiced, he had to kind of, Paul was kind of calling him to kind of make a public or intentional choice to lean towards one way. I think of, like, I grew up in a home where my mom is Adventist, my dad is not. And for a long time, even though my dad left the house when I was a kid, I always knew that if I would call him, he would give me like a bly to do whatever I wanted. And like, you know, came like through Sabbath, like playing football on Sabbath and stuff like that, because I was like really scared about that type of stuff. And my mom wouldn't let me, so I'd call my dad, and then they'd be like, oh, let him go. So it's like, I always knew I had like a way out of things that I was committing to. Not even about like a spiritual law or anything, but like I had a way out for what I decided to commit to in general. And so I don't know, maybe that was him, like, you don't have a way, like, for you to fully commit to one thing.
Ben, I didn't know that part of your story. Thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful. And it's definitely perspective. So interestingly, when I think about it, how do you know that you're circumcised?
Right.
now?
Like how do other people know?
Like prove it. That's just a total side of what I was thinking about. But
this pod just changed the.
We know what
Change
issues
the name of this podcast. But I think it's not out of character with Paul when we think of Paul saying things like, I am all things to all people that I may further the gospel, right? And if Timothy is coming into a space where he's going to minister to these people, just like Paul would do towards the Gentiles, I wonder if Paul is saying, listen, we've got to go the extra mile as we're reaching across different spaces and put aside what's normative for us in order that others would be able to be blessed and might get the gospel. And I think that it speaks to me because so often we only do things for God as far as we are comfortable doing things for God. Or we only do things for God as far as it's convenient to our professional title, convenient to our family life, convenient to our personal desires, all of that, right? And what does it mean to move past that and become very uncomfortable in order that the gospel might reach someone else. I mean, circumcision is not an easy thing. Today, we've got, there's anesthesia, there's good surgeons, but
Not a game.
back in the day, it was like, yo, yeah. And they used to do it when they were, 7, 8 days after birth, as per Jewish tradition. Timothy was a grown man. He was there for it all. He was there for it all.
Well, and what's cool is that it says before that Timothy was well thought of by the believers. So he already had an in.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was like a little bit of an extra security or maybe an extra challenge of his devotion. I'm not quite sure which one, but it's just interesting because like they already liked him. They already looked up to him.
Yeah.
They already respected him, which is why Paul wanted him to come along. And then he's like, just to be extra careful, let's do this extra thing.
We're going to seal
It feels kinda-
the deal.
Yeah, Calico.
I wonder if there was so okay, when I was in high school, I went to India when I was a senior, and something I always thought was funny was they told us if we were going to preach, and they told us if we were ever questioned, tell them that we were making wells, which we were building wells as well, but we were paying people to build wells and we were preaching. And I almost wonder if like Timothy is half Jewish, half Gentile, and this would discredit him from being able to partake in a lot of like the Jewish ceremonies and go to the temple and get clean. So he's like just been feeling dirty and living dirty his whole life, kind of as this like guy who doesn't fit anywhere. And I wonder if this is a way for Paul of kind of like maybe like healing a part of Timothy's past. Like, hey, you're Jewish, bro. Like, it's okay. But now you're a follower of Jesus. And I don't know, maybe I'm reading too deeply, but to me, maybe there was some significance for Timothy. Like he became a Jew when he no longer needed to be a Jew.
I love
because
that.
Jesus was now his.
Because maybe it wasn't
know?
for the people, it was for Timothy. It wasn't for the credibility with the crowd, it was for his own credibility with himself and with God.
And now he could sit with his like cultural identity of a Jew without it making him prideful or without it making him arrogant or without it making him feel like he's better than the Gentile. Like it's almost like the soil was ready for something like that. Maybe
I
I'm
don't
reading
know if
too
you're reading too deep.
but-
I feel like it could be kind of maybe even both, because Paul's not only calling him just like interpersonally, but also to like be a leader in the church, and in order to lead a group of people.
Yeah.
I really like what you said, Sarah May. I just, at the same time, and this isn't even pushing back, I just feel as if it's, and maybe because we're Adventists, we can relate with this as much as Jews, because like so much of our religious identity is cultural. Like there's so much of being an Adventist that's so cultural. Like if you didn't know what haystacks were, I don't even know if you could be a pastor. At least in the West. And I mean, that's just a silly one. But if you didn't know what, like Sabbath was, or like, how could you even pastor Sabbath keepers? So to me, it seems as if, and I was experiencing this speaking, Icky, to what you like brought up about my dual living situation. As I just called my senior pastor the other day, and he gave me a word of wisdom, because when I was down there last, I think I just wore like this to preach, like just like a little button up. And he was just like, hey, just a word of wisdom, like maybe next week, like wear a suit. And I was like, yeah, sounds good. He's like, yeah. And the reason is just because like, that's the culture here. And it's not to like change you as a person, but just so that people will have ears to hear. Sometimes you create a barrier with such a simple thing that could just be, and then all of a sudden, if you shift it, and that's kind of a hard word, I feel like, in our today's culture, especially in the West, because we have this hyper individualistic, like,
is
don't
hard.
change me. Like, God's made me to be who I am. But here Paul's like, nah, bro, get circumcised as an adult.
That's good. That's good.
We're mad about a tie, and he's out here.
He's snipping. He's snipping.
Yeah, he's snipping, yo. This conversation's too good already.
My guy got
This is-
snipped, and I won't wear a tie, bro.
Yo, that's a hashtag.
Bro, but I won't wear a tie though.
But I won't do it. Get snipped, but I won't do it.
Like,
It works both ways, right? Because I'm thinking about my eventual head elder at my former church. He came to church and didn't know anything about God, and so he came in just as he is, and wanted to hang out. And he's like, "Hey, let's hang out." I said, "Cool, man, let's do it. Whatever you want." And this was him getting to know Christ. And he said, "Where do you want to hang out at?" I said, "Man, wherever you want to hang out." He says, let's go to billiards. Let's go play pool." As an Adventist, I'm the worst pool player in the world. Let me tell you, I don't know anything about it. I came in swimming shorts. That's how bad I am. and he was racking it and killing it. And his mouth was like, he was just using words that Adventist folk don't use. And, he ordered a drink. He ordered some beer. And it was one of my first experiences as a minister adult that challenged me out of my Adventist comfort zone to be like, I've got to be here. This is the place I've got to be at. That's uncomfortable if I want the gospel to reach someone else.
Icky, can I ask
I love it, man. He became my head elder, man. He got baptized. I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, all that is just a part of the story of something that God was doing. And we've got to be willing to become uncomfortable with others in order that they may get some gospel goodness.
That's good.
Sorry, Kyle, what were you saying?
No, I was just saying we probably have to move on. But
Yeah.
what I was saying was that whenever we do that, I think a challenge that I've been being met with, like I've been trying to intentionally put myself in positions where I have to talk to people who are very different from me. And when I do that, there have been moments where just being vulnerable, where I've walked away and I've gone, did I condone what they were doing? Did I did my presence there? And it's like, I feel like there's a fine line, but I don't know where that line is, And I'm not saying billiards is a problem, but some people might think going to the billiards hall is, sorry, I shouldn't say that with an attitude, because if you feel that way, bro, you are right to feel that. But some people might feel like that's a wrong thing. And how do we navigate that?
I would say let God figure out where the fine lines are, because it's God who wins people, right? It's us who come along and just reflect God to people. And if I'm not willing to step in places where people are awaiting for God's presence to show up, then I'm not doing my part. And then I can't be like, why don't people come to church? Why don't they love the Lord? Well, because you didn't go out there. You didn't spend time with people. And here you are complaining about why they're not here.
And honestly, if you're not uncomfortable at some point with your ministry and your gospel and your story, what are you doing? Because the world's an uncomfortable place. And I think the statement is be all things to all people, right? And obviously you need to have your compass with that. But at the same time, Jesus didn't stop loving people because it was a dirty situation or an uncomfortable situation. If it's love, it doesn't actually matter. That permeates everything, and that heals all things. So yeah, someone may be uncomfortable and you have to go based off your comfort zone. But I don't know. I think that's the beautiful part of being human and in ministry, and honestly a Christian, is we're called to be slightly uncomfortable.
You know what is uncomfortable? When people who are not Adventists come to our churches and then hear us talk about how we all went to Union, or how, oh, hey, you from Andrews? Yeah, me too. And we have these
nobody went to Union. Stop playing.
Yeah, you're right.
I went to Union. That's it.
Yeah, Kyle, just by myself. So you know what people, unchurched people feel like then, Kyle, when they come to our church.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we all went to PUC, or we all went to Andrews, right? And then you have these cliques who know each other really well, and everyone feels so foreign when they come into our spaces because they don't get that, right? They didn't grow up eating haystacks. They don't know much about vegetarianism. So it's hard for them to feel at home and want to stay because it's just so foreign to them.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's real.
We've belabored this. Let's move on, my friends. Kyle, thank you for pushing us forward.
We'll just rush through the rest.
Yeah.
No. Okay, let's start. Verse 6. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them.
I'm thankful for the Spirit of God that sometimes keeps us from going places that we think we need to go.
That's good.
I'm just always in awe of how in tune they are with what to do and not to do. This is me just being very honest. Like, I'm constantly in an existential crisis trying to figure out, like, wait, is that what am I actually supposed to be doing? What should I actually be pushing back on? Where should I actually be? And, you know, I think it's easy to start second guessing yourself, but I think there's so much beauty in like a lot of these narratives where it's just like the Spirit said not to do this, so I didn't. And then the Spirit said to go here, so I did. And I'm like, how did you know?
I think that's really, it's a tough one, because there's times where people also say it's the Spirit of Jesus, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Speak more
That
on
is
There's
true.
people who, they're like, I didn't do this, and it's the Spirit of Jesus. And you're like, wait a second, what? I thought you just didn't like that thing. Like, you know, it's just like,
Are you
I don't
sure?
know. And so it's hard. Yeah. Like, this is so exactly, it's so inspiring, but at the same time, it always makes you like, pray that the Lord, the Holy Spirit, and the Spirit of Jesus continues to influence our life, as well as we don't try to create it to be a crutch for ourselves, our own decisions.
That's good.
I heard a really, really good talk a few weeks ago by Dr. Kendra Holoviak, Beast Mode, and she talked about the Greek word for when they laid their hands on Jesus, right, to seize Jesus. And one of the beautiful points she pulled out is that all kinds of people were putting their hands on Jesus, including those of us who want to seize him or grab him for our own sake. Like, we want to control Jesus to do the things that we want to do. And just speaking to Ben's point, so true, man. Like, I've heard, I'm sure you all have heard as pastors, it's people come up to you and say, the Lord is telling me this. And you're like,
definitely
no,
not.
he is not telling you that. Right. That's your chemistry in your body. That's your desires. It comes from a lot of places, but that is not from the Lord.
This is where the terrible side of me always comes in when people do that. I'm like, tell me everything.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like,
Let me decide if this train wreck is from the Lord or not.
I'm down to hear it all, because normally it's a really
Very
good
true.
story.
Yeah, true.
Yo, it's real though, because I think if I can be vulnerable, like in my own journey, like my wife and I've had some like stuff happen, like we've had some fertility issues and stuff, and it has made my heart at times a little cynical, if I'm honest. And like, when I used to be one of those people that was like, yeah, God is speaking to us, or and there were moments in this journey where I felt like he was speaking and leading, guiding, but then it didn't turn out how I wanted it to. And how do we sit in that?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that I've been able to work through some of that and you know, honestly, just wrestle with God. I was mad at him for a while, then we were good, then we were, you know, like we've had some seasons. And but how do we wrestle? How do we do that? What does it look like?
I think
Could we truly be in a relationship with anyone without actually wrestling with them? You know, so I would say that's a deep relationship.
Even that phrase "wrestle" comes from that story of a man,
That's true.
Jacob, actually wrestling.
Jacob.
You know, like the physical, it's like that story is so physical and like kinesthetic and tangible, and like his hip is out of alignment afterward. It's,
Yeah.
you know, so it's like, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
Which is painful.
Yeah.
Having a hip out of alignment is not like,
you
we
speaking
kind of
from
just
personal experience,
glaze
Kyle?
over that. Like, no, like I was a skateboarder my whole life. All right. So shout out to Mike Reines. Like, you know, it's a real
real.
thing. Then
Well,
hips come out of place.
When you think about it, when you think about Paul, who also had a thorn in his side, right? And had to struggle with something. And he was struggling with God about this healing as well. Like, God, take this from me. And he had to settle with, your grace is sufficient. Sometimes we've got to settle with, God, I don't get it, but your grace is going to be sufficient through this season.
Well, and I think like it's important to remember that this is written retroactively. So they're like writing about something that happened. And it's much clearer when you look back than it is when you're in it. Because I think I used to get so frustrated when I would read the Bible and I'd be like, there's always these like grand miracles and there's always this clarity of thought and this deep understanding. And I was like, I should never talk to another human because I have zero clarity. I never know what's going on. And I'm perpetually frustrated with the like, what does anything mean? You know, and like, how am I actually contributing to the world? And like, what is worth fighting for? What is not worth fighting for? And that like the trenches that people sit in with their like, what am I actually supposed to be doing? And with a lot of the cultural things happening, I think people are trying to find their voice and which voice is helpful and healing and a forward motion, and which voice is when we need to remain silent and sit in that silence and confusion and hurt. That is the silence maybe of God. And I think when I read the Bible, I have to remind myself it was spanned over a really long time. These are the highlights. And it was written as a reflection of what happened. And there's so much more clarity in what happened once you've been through it and you're already where you are.
That's awesome. And I think to believe in God is also to accept the presence and absence that's at the same time of God. Right? In the sense of us believing in a God that's constantly leading us and loving us, as well as a God whose kingdom is not here yet. Right? And so I think the only way to sit in that or to sit to other people is just to say like, same here. Right? Like, Kyle, like, man, I know those times too. And like, we'll, you know, and I don't know when some of those things will turn around for us. Right? At the same time, right, when we look back, we do see that God has been present too.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's things I'm asking for now, and I'm not seeing it. I'm like, God, how is this not your way?
Right.
Yeah. And so to accept the presence and absence of our God that constantly
Ben
loves
just
us
preached a whole sermon.
Well, yeah, Ben, that was
That's
fire.
epic.
But to like add to what you're saying is like they wanted, like, if we really look at the text, like they wanted to go into that.
Right.
They wanted to go into Mysia or Myja or however you say it. Like they were at the border, like they were down. They were like, I said Mysia when I was reading it, and I was like, I'm just gonna continue
You
with
just
that.
gotta keep
You
rolling, bro. Yeah.
I'm just gonna keep.
It was good. It was solid.
I know what I'm saying right now. So you know,
You just gotta act through it, bro.
I've been to seminary.
Found
y'all.
it out with me.
But like they wanted to do that and they didn't get what they wanted.
Yeah.
And as I look back at this story, you know, you guys are both talking about looking back and like they see it was a blessing. It's
good.
Yeah.
You know, and I think something my friend Ben Williams and I were talking last night, and he reminded me that God has greater blessings for us than the ones we currently have. And we have to like believe that. And when we don't believe that, that's when we have trouble in our life. That the best is not yet to come.
Yeah.
Maybe we should also lay down some ground rules, though, for those listening who might, just some clear ground rules about if you're thinking, is this God's will or not? There are some good cues you can use to decide whether or not this is a good thing or not a good thing. And then when it takes place, you leave it in God's hands, right? But some of the cues are, is this beneficial to others? Is it life-giving? Right. Ask yourself these kinds of questions when you start thinking like, this must be the Lord's will for my life. Ask yourself, is this beneficial to you, or is it beneficial for others? Is it life-giving to the community, or is it only going to be life-giving for you?
Right.
Like
That's
those
really
things
good.
are important. I think when you're thinking decision, because too often I hear people, man. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard individuals say, you know what, Pastor, this person God is calling me to
Right.
marry this person, and I'm like, but you don't
Let's
even
talk
know that
about
person's
seminary
name.
real quick.
Like,
Where is he?
let's get real here. These, like,
Slow down.
Or when pastors get their dream call and they go and they're like, I just really feel like God's calling me to do that.
Right.
It's like, nah, bro, you want to do that?
Yeah.
Go do it.
Yeah. And be okay with that. Just say like,
Yeah.
this is a good opportunity. I feel like I can pour into this space. But don't be like, the Lord is calling me here and I've got to leave. Like, come on.
My
man.
friend Donnie Keel and I were talking about this one time, and he says that we like to over spiritualize things. That, like, we don't have to. Like, you don't have to over spiritualize the fact that you want to go and do that thing.
Yeah.
Now, ask God
That's
what he
almost,
thinks
I feel
about
like,
it.
such a great question to ask yourself. Like, am I feeling like God is calling me to do this because it's really secretly in my heart what I want? Or am I feeling like it's him because it's really him? And I feel like oftentimes the things that
Right.
God's calling me to do, I don't want to do. Or they're really difficult, or they require me to
Yeah.
be way more of a servant, or they require me to grow in an area that I've been resisting. Like, I feel like often those are the things that God is really calling me to do. Like, oh, I need to be more of a servant in this area, or like grow in this area that I've been, or I've just been in sin in this area, and God's trying me to,
Exactly.
like to move me, or like things that are like hard and difficult. It's usually not the thing that I want for funsies for myself, or more like notoriety or money or like,
Funsies.
it's almost never those things.
No, it's true. It's true. As you really got to dive into your heart's desire and figure out where is it coming from.
Yeah.
Some of I hear people all the time, Lord, I've been praying for this lotto, and if I win, I'm going to bless everyone.
Amen.
I'm going to bless the church, and so they're like, no, it's really a selfless thing. Like, it's for others. And I'm like,
Grandma's getting a Bentley.
yeah, like, Pastor, we're
Icky sharing
gonna
his testimony, man.
build out a new building.
Yeah,
I
hope
prayed
you hit us
every
up.
week, man. I'm, Lord, please, Lord. Oh,
It is my testimony.
why art thou not faithful to me?
Testing your faith, Vicky. It's just testing your
Yeah,
faith.
We should probably move on.
Kyle's our,
Come on. By the way,
We
the
got
Lord
9
gives me that
minutes left
lotto.
to
None
cover
of you are
over
getting
half a chapter. Maybe we need to do a part 2.
Nikki, just remember me when you come into your kingdom.
Oh man,
it. I got you. Not bad.
Nikki, when you're on Dancing with the Stars, let us know. All right.
Who's reading
All
our
right,
next
well,
section?
I'll continue. I got it. We're in
Okay.
verse 11 of chapter 16. It says, "We boarded at the boat of Troas and sailed straight across to the island of Samothrace. And the next day we landed at Neapolis. From there we reached Philippi, a major city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony, and we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath we went a little way outside the city to a riverbank, where we thought people would be meeting for prayer. And we sat down to speak with some women who had gathered there. One of them was Lydia from Thyatira, a merchant of expensive purple cloth who worshiped God. As she listened to us, the Lord opened her heart, and she accepted what Paul was saying. She and her household were baptized, and she asked us to be her guests. "If you agree that I am a true believer in God," she said, "come and stay at my home." And she urged us until we agreed.
What a good story.
I don't know why it says that she was a merchant of purple cloth. There's probably some reason, some real historical reason. I just think it's kind of funny
Really
that
specific.
it's like, yo,
Wasn't
this
that
is
the
Lydia. She
symbol?
was a purple cloth
Push the
dealer.
perp.
well, I think it was like
She
the
was
symbol
pushing
of
that perp.
royalty, right? So she must have worked for royalty, because isn't that
That's
the color of
true.
royalty throughout historical
Thank you, Sarah May,
history?
for
She's
being
bringing
a
out the
real
historical
theologian.
context that we're supposed to know.
No, I was just going to say, Elia's not here, so we don't have someone who read the commentary at length.
You don't have the John Scott. We miss you, Elia. Yeah, you get me and Ben saying selling perp. That's what you get.
We'll create the theme song for that later.
I'm sorry, Jay Fit.
We've strayed so far away from the
too
original
far.
plans.
We're sorry, Saltworks. No. All right, let's focus. That was all my fault.
great.
I had to bring up the
man.
purple cloth.
I appreciate it.
that's
I
good.
was going to say, the thing that's interesting to me is that she's like, if you actually believe I'm a follower, come to my house. And then it says she urged them until they came.
That's funny.
All right, let's
that's
move on to the next
No.
section.
Well, I do have one. I have one serious thing to add to Sarah
Sorry, I'm
May.
just playing.
It's beautiful to me that this was really important to her. And Icky, this is beautiful to you as well.
It is. I'm trying to compose myself. I apologize.
I really like as she listened to us, the Lord opened her heart, and it almost spoke to me like sometimes I think one of the things I'm afraid of the most as a pastor is like I want to be liked and I want to be relatable and I want to have friends, and I especially with non-believing people, like I'm so afraid of alienating them. I'm so afraid of, because I just grew up in super like secular, ultra liberal, a lot of ex-Christian spaces, and I feel like when having conversations with those people, I'm just so afraid to alienate. But it's so powerful. It was just powerful to me to see, like, as she listened to us, the Lord opened her heart. Like, God is the one who opened her heart. And all they had to do was speak. All Paul had to do was say it. And I think that's often my greatest fear, is actually just speaking the gospel. Because I'm afraid to alienate people.
I love that. I think we try so hard to be the one that opens people's hearts and check the wins as our own. Like, dude, I had like 10 baptisms, or something. And really, was it anything you did, or did you show up and allow God to actually work in the situation? And I think we work so hard to articulate things well and do everything perfectly, so that way we have something to be proud of. But I think there's a raw energy in actual gospel and like actually caring for people. It's not this curated, beautiful thing. It's actually really messy, confusing, and sometimes confronting to like our own ego. And I think it can be really beautiful when you realize that like it's God that shows up in these weird moments. I mean, it's the conversation in the supermarket that might be powerful than your sermon, unfortunately. And that's okay.
That's good.
Like that's
That is okay. We have to be okay about that, and also to use humility when we. For some, I don't know why, but when people are like, baptized, for me, it's like
4th gen.
awesome, good for you. But it's not any of us who do it. All the baptisms I've done thousands. Now I'm playing, but I really no. All the baptisms I have done in my life, in my professional life, there's always been a story connected to it about how they got to that baptismal water, and most of the time it had nothing to do with me, right? And stories can go on and on about, was this person who, like, I got interested in Jesus, or I went to this one church and I just felt God's presence, but now I'm here. And so, like, you get this bigger picture, you get this big understanding that baptism was never about me. It's never about you. It's always been about God and how God uses people, right? So the minute we start talking about like, oh, let me get into some baptisms, we start doing that thing, we've lost sight of what it means to be in God's grace. Like, I don't get that. I don't get that credit. Right. Kyle doesn't get that credit. Ben doesn't get that credit. And every time we see a baptism, we shouldn't be like, dang, how come I don't baptize more? We should be like, yo, God is still moving in the world. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
The power is actually the power of, and when we have the courage to actually speak it, like God shows up. And okay, this is a quick story. I know we're trying to move on. Last year I went through kind of a season of like real discouragement of like pastoral calling and like, oh God, have you really called me to do this? And had a series of conversations, like encounters with people where God kind of confirmed the calling for me. And one of them was with this girl named Hannah. I talked to her in this train when I was traveling. And she found out what I was doing, and I like to play it off while I've been here at seminary, like, oh, I'm studying to be a hospital chaplain, because you don't want to tell people you're a pastor, because then that opens all sort of weird conversations. At least that's how I felt at the time. I was like, I don't want that energy. I don't want that smoke.
Were you trying to
I was not.
Hannah a little more than just
biblical name? You're doing great.
Yeah, I mean, is she a nurse or a teacher? I mean, let's find out the real details. We need.
Identity and all this, but she's an awesome person, and I ended up sharing with her. I ended up learning she's a queer student studying in New York, and she's like a medical student. And she ended up asking me what I do, and I told her, and I kept trying to be cryptic, like, oh yeah, I'm a hospital chaplain. She's like, oh cool, like you deal with people who are dying. You're a spiritual person. I was like, yeah. She's like, what do you believe happens after death? And I tried to be cryptic again. I'm like, yeah, I believe there's like a divine, like I was using this language like energy and the divine, and she was like, no, like, what do you believe? And she kept asking me, what do you believe? And eventually I was just like, well, this is what I believe. And she was like, I love it. That's beautiful. She's like, I've never heard that before in my life. And she's like, are you a Christian? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, I've only met Christians who condemn me for being gay. And I've never met a Christian who's like told me what
Wow.
Christians believe. And I was like, do you want to know? And she's like, yeah. She's like, Christians say, Jesus died for their sins. What does that mean? And I was like, oh no. I even told her, I was like, this is like the question. Like, this is like
That's a
the
real
final
one.
exam question. And she's like, well, can you share? And I was like, yeah. So I ended up, against all of my reluctance, I ended up sharing the gospel with her. And she's like, I've never heard that in my life. She's like, I didn't even know that's what Christianity was about.
Wow.
And she's like, that was beautiful. And we had a prayer. And afterwards, I was just left reeling like, wow, God, my greatest fear is like actually sharing the gospel. But I find whenever I have done it in that moment, people are compelled that the Spirit does a thing. So that was a long story, but that
No, it was worth
that
the
verse
time.
really
Love
spoke
that.
to
Love
me.
that, bro.
Yeah.
That's
That's
good.
really good.
100.
That's really nice.
Wow. So friends, we've hit our 40-minute mark, but why don't we go ahead and just read through the last portion, and then we'll end with a thought on that last portion from each of you. Would that be okay?
Should I hit it?
Yeah.
We're at
Anthony,
16
would
to
you
40?
mind reading for us?
Okay. We'll do a speed read.
16 to 200.
Like I said, 16 to
This is
40.
my pastor speed read voice. One day, as we were going down to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit that enabled her to tell the future. She earned a lot of money for her masters by telling fortunes. She followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God. They have come to tell you how to be saved." This went on day after day until Paul got so exasperated that he turned and said to the demon within her, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And instantly it left her. Her master's hopes of wealth were now shattered, so they grabbed Paul and Silas and dragged them before the authorities at the marketplace. The whole city in the uproar is in an uproar because of these Jews, they shouted to the city officials. They are teaching customs that are illegal for us Romans to practice. A mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them to be stripped and beaten with wooden rods. They were severely beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure they didn't escape. So the jailer put them in the inner dungeon and clamped their feet in the stocks. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening. Suddenly, there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundations. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted to him, "Stop, don't kill yourself, we are all here." The jailer called for lights and ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, along with everyone in your household." And they shared the word of the Lord with him and with all who lived in his household. Even at that hour of the night, the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. Then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. He brought them into his house and set a meal before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God. The next morning, the city officials sent the police to tell the jailer, "Let those men go." So the jailer told Paul, "The city officials have said, you and Silas are free to go. Leave. Go in peace." But Paul replied, They have publicly beaten us without a trial and put us in prison, and we are Roman citizens. So now they want us to leave secretly? Certainly not. Let them come themselves to release us. When the police reported this, the city officials were alarmed to learn that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. So they came to the jail and apologized to them. Then they brought them out and begged them to leave the city. When Paul and Silas left the prison, they returned to the home of Lydia. There they met with the believers and encouraged them once more. Then they left town.
Nothing to
Closing
see
thoughts,
here.
friends. Just a quick point at the beginning. Paul got tired of that girl's
True, he
demon,
was like,
so he had to
"I've had enough of you."
And he had to, you got to go.
This is not the move.
This is not the business for me.
So good.
Yeah. Let's close out with some last thoughts, and we'll finish with you, Kyle. And if you can wrap us up
Yeah.
and bring us home, Captain. Ben.
Oh, true, you muted, Ben.
My guy put us on mute so he could
Some-
text.
Yo,
Kyle stays coming for people.
Happy
All right,
Sabbath,
something
everyone,
down.
where you're listening from.
Yo,
I
man.
hope you're
always
laughing
something.
with us.
Happy Sabbath.
The Spirit's
Happy
got a
Sabbath.
hold of us, man.
Happy Sabbath, we in the street.
I follow the spirit, y'all.
Straight
This
along with
is
you.
no longer,
Right?
this is no longer a song. This is Fleshworks podcast. Pray for us. No,
Pray for all of us.
we've had cheese drinks. All right. So what I was gonna say is, I thought it was interesting in the earlier section before that that Lydia had to urge them to be a part of.
God, what's
You just There's a lot. This is derailing rapidly.
okay? We good.
Oh my God!
This is what we do under
So
pressure.
bad.
Let's do this. Ben, pull it together. And Anthony, kick us off, man. What did you think?
Actually, it was the final verse that I think I took away. I hadn't seen that before when I read the story. When Paul and Silas left the prison, they returned back to the home of Lydia, who they had met with the purple cloth, right? There they met with the believers and encouraged them. They were just imprisoned, beaten. They were like really seriously beaten. And then they were imprisoned all night. And then they, after that whole experience, they come back and just encourage the believers, like, man, isn't God good? Like, that's really nuts. I think I'm just taking.
That's not
Yeah,
what you'd
I'd
be
be
doing
like,
after
man,
all
God,
that,
how
huh?
could you let that happen? Like,
Yeah.
like that's. I don't know if I'd be quite ready that soon to have the, like what Sarah May was saying earlier, like that reflective look back on and say, man, God was present. It's like the next day, and they're like, man, isn't God good? Because we just got beaten and thrown into prison, like. So that's just encouraging to me, like
Right.
them just living. Yeah.
Well, and I really like that. And I think one of the things that stands out to me is that in prison, they didn't sit there and pout and say, like, woe is me, I keep getting into these situations. Instead, when the jailer freaked out, they comforted him, which changed the narrative, changed the story. When people were asking questions, they actually listened to them. And I think for me, there's two things I think of. One is that often we think that Paul just ended up in these really intense situations. It was kind of a progression. Like, he got more and more confident in his faith and his belief, like that whole theory, like God won't give you more than you can handle kind of thing. And I think this for me is a good example of that. Like, he wasn't just like from day one, like, well, you're in prison, this is your new life, right? It was kind of like he'd been through a whole series of things where he saw God show up in a really powerful and beautiful and healing way. And he was getting stronger in how to communicate and how to share gospel and love and community. And I think so him going through those things, even though they may kind of suck along the way, helped him in a situation where if most of us just got thrown in prison, we probably wouldn't know how to be present with what's actually going on. And then, like you said, we probably wouldn't be able to be reflective anytime soon. It would take us years of therapy to be like, oh, there it was,
Yeah.
and like, oh, that's
God,
a
I finally
beautiful
see you
story.
10 years later.
So I think for me, it's just, and I think that's the cool part about scripture is it's this craziness of all these stories that compile into one and show the progression of growth and understanding of what God is actually there for.
Beautiful. Thanks, Sarah May. For me, what I pulled out of this passage was God has an agenda to save not just the oppressed, but the oppressors.
Love that.
God has a deep heart for all of us. And it goes to the point of, finding yourself in prison and being slain. And yet God still has a deep, deep love for those who did
I love
that
that.
and wants them home as well.
And that's the story of Paul too.
Yeah.
Like, he was the oppressor.
Very true.
So
Yeah, that's
maybe
right.
his heart bled a little bit for the guy. Like, man, I know what it's like to be the one that's holding the reins and like locking people up for things. And so here, let me give you a piece of the hope I
That's
found.
good.
Solid. Ben?
Yeah, I think what I really loved was that where Paul and Silas were urged to stay is where they were able to retreat to. They were, and I wonder, like, being such workaholics, they were, the fact that they were able to baptize people and then they couldn't just stay there, right? They had to be urged to stay, but it's like, how many of us are just, so caught up in the work that we forget, like, to pause for the people. And by doing that, we also create places of solace for ourselves, places of rest and escape. And because of, they finally listened to the urge like the constant calling of Lydia, they had a place to retreat to when they got out of prison. I think that's so beautiful. And so,
Love that.
Pastor Smith.
Well, I can go last.
What do you got?
Close us out.
I'll close this up. As on a serious note, as I listen to everyone kind of share, and as we've read through the story, the thing that keeps sticking out to me is that there was a willingness from them to just do whatever they needed to do. And I think, like, at least for me, my spiritual life can get very rigid because I create ideas of what I have to do, or God told me to do this one time, so this is what he always wants me to do. And I guess maybe the encouragement for us today is, how can we just continue to let God lead us? How can we continue to have that kind of lifestyle that these people had, where one day they're here, the next day they're there, and sure, they might have wanted to get into this place, or they might have wanted to go into that city, but they were going to let God dictate all of that to them. And as we've covered, I think it's hard to do that. Like, it's messy in the moment, and there's not a clear path forward as to here's step 1, 2, 3. But I think all of us can create different rhythms kind of in our lives that allow us to do that. And I think maybe one of them that we could all try this week is take time every day to not just ask God for things, but then intentionally give him your day. Like, say, I went through all these things with you, God. Here it is. Do what you need to do. And I don't know, maybe we'll see God move us in different ways. And if anything, I think when I do that, it makes me more alert and more attuned, because I'm looking for it then for the rest of the day. So, but with that said, we do want to just thank you all for joining us. Thanks for putting up with our antics and our Bible study. We'll make sure that they're in line. And we want to also just thank you so much for being a part of Saltworks. Thank you for being a part of the One Project and our community. And we want to encourage you to continue listening, continue giving in any way, whether that's giving your prayers, giving your dimes, whatever you can do. It all helps to keep this ministry going. But with that said, thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.